Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of the Getting Started tutorial mini-series. You've already made your first graph in the last video, and so now we're going to show you how to set up a little more complex game logic. Now this wouldn't be a very fun game if we could just go open all the doors without any sort of stuff, so we're going to make a key that we use to open that door. So we'll drag a new object in here, we'll call it key, and we'll add a collider to it, and since like the door, we want something to happen when we run into this key, i.e. run a graph. We will add a collision graph trigger to it. So, and we'll make this look a little better so it doesn't just look the same as everything else. There we go. So we have ourselves a key. So we're going to make a new graph that this runs when you run into it. So we'll select this, and you can create a new graph just in the project view, or you can click this little arrow here, click instruction graph, and make a simple graph. It'll pop open the window to ask you where you want to save it. We're going to call this one key graph, and it'll automatically assign it there, which is pretty cool. Now you can open up this window. You can select the new graph either in this little drop down over here on the right. You can do what we did last time where you click the open editor, or you can just double click on things over here and they'll open up in the graph too. So here's our key graph. So first thing, we'll do the same that we did with the door. We'll create a destroy object node. So we want the key to be destroyed when we run into it. And we'll call this destroy key. And you'll remember we talked about the context object, which is the object that is actually running the graph, and that's defined by this context name. So we'll call that key. And then we destroy the key. So we run this graph, we'll see that this is destroyed. Perfect. Oh, one other little thing. I'm just going to make this a trigger, just so it doesn't stop our player like you saw when we run into it. Perfect. There we go. So now we want to increment an amount of keys that we have when we run into this key, and we do that with what we call a global variable. Now a variable is a value, if you're not a programmer, it's a value or a reference to an object that's been assigned a name, so it can be referenced from all our nodes and all our graphs. And the way we create global variables is with a variable link component. So I'm going to go to our player, and we're going to add a variable link. So the variable link keeps track of all your global variables so they can be accessed from any graph. You can add them to any object, you can have any number of them, and those variables will always exist as long as this object is alive. So since I added it to the player just because we know the player is always going to be around and we always want this object or this variable that we're going to define around. So we can click on the little plus button. We can say the name of our variable, which we will call key count, and click create. And we want our key count to be an integer. So now we have that, and we're going to go actually increment it. So we're going to go back to our graph and create another node called an expression node. So an expression is just a string statement that allows you to alter variables using math and other basic commands. Pretty simple little mini language inside the editor. So for our expression, we're going to call this increment keys. And we're going to go global.keyCount equals. So that's how we access our global variable through the global keyword. And it's called key count. We're going to do dot equals global.keyCount plus 1. So that will add 1 to the key count that we started at, which was 0. And if you want to do a little shortcut, you can just do plus or equal to. Pretty simple. So now if we run this, we have a key. Now you couldn't tell just because there's not really any indication. I happen to know that that did work. But the way we can look at that is what we call the watch window. So if you click on this little eye at the top of the instruction graph window, it'll open up this. I usually like to just dock it here at the bottom of the inspector since it does kind of the same thing. So now when we run our game, you can see that the global variables popped up and it has key count there. It says 0. So now when we run into our, if you keep an eye on this number, when we run into our key, it now says 1. So that's pretty cool. And you can live edit this number, change it all you want. Pretty awesome. So now let's utilize that number. and use it to open up the door. So we'll go back to our door graph, and we'll use a conditional node. So we'll go to create conditional. Now the conditional node has two branches, on true and on false, and it basically branches to either one of those outputs based on a condition, which is the same type of expression that we had before. So the expression can also, in addition to just doing math functions and stuff, it can also be used for comparison. So our condition will be global.keyCount is greater than 0. And we want to insert this before we open the door, so we'll move our connection there, and let's call our conditional node has key. And now if that statement, global.keyCount is greater than 0, is true, we want to open the door. Let's organize this a little better. So now you can see, so we go back into here, we can't open the door, but now if we grab our key count is 1, boom, we can open the door. Pretty awesome. So I guess what we also want to do is we'll just show you one other math function. Let's create another expression node that when we open the door, will decrement our key count. These keys aren't reusable. So we'll just do the same thing, global.keyCount minus or equal to 1. And you can see when you don't have a valid expression, you just get a little error here and it turns red. So just a little bit of useful syntax stuff. We'll call this decrement keys. And that same thing, so now we can see our key count went up and now it went down as soon as we use the key. So I'm going to teach you a little more about debugging, because when these graphs get super complex, it's sometimes hard to keep track of stuff. So we can use what we call breakpoints. So if you click on the has key, you can click on this little red button, and now that means when we run this graph, the graph will pause when we hit this node. So let's run into the door, and you can see that now our graph is stopped at this node. So you can see the flow. All the green lines indicate where the graph has gone, and then there's this red outline that shows you where it's stopped. So right now we know that we don't have a key. So we know on false, it's just if we hit step, which you can continue the graph by just hitting play, or this step button just sends the graph forward one node, we'll know that it won't actually run. So if we hit play, it'll just stop. And the graph is over because we didn't have a key. But if we go back, we run the graph again, we can actually live edit all our stuff. So we haven't even grabbed the key down here yet, but we can go in here and we can click, we'll give ourselves a node. Now if we hit play, it will actually run the on true branch, which is pretty cool. But before I do that, I'll just show you, you can see also the watch window, the door graph has popped up too. So this is the context of this graph, and it shows you all the different variables you can access. So this is the context object, which is door, corresponds to that door right there. And these are the global variables. So global is what you can type in to access key count. And we'll get to all this other stuff later in future tutorials. But for now, that's just cool to see those types of things. So if we hit play, we had altered our key count, and there it goes. And we can exit. So pretty cool. Really, really simple to set up all this stuff. So to wrap up, we talked about variables, taught you about a little bit about expressions. We have branching graphs now. And if you have any questions, like always, feel free to ask us on Discord. Check out the docs online. And I'll see you for the next video. Thanks for watching.